Direct Connection is made by MPT to serve all of our diverse communities and is made possible by the generous support of our members. Thank you. Live from Maryland Public Television, this is Direct Connection with Jeff Salkin.
Good evening. Welcome to your Direct Connection. Coming up tonight, why more young people are having heart attacks and how to fight that trend. That's ahead. We begin tonight with our newsmaker, Maryland Congressman John Sarbanes, a member of the House Oversight Committee. Congressman, thank you for being with us.
Great to be here, Jeff.
We want to talk about Chesapeake Bay.
Yeah, looking forward to that.
Bay Week here on MPT.
Yes.
There's a lot to talk about, but we ought to begin with the Mueller report and all the fallout from that. You were on a conference call a short time ago. Speaker Pelosi, members of the Democratic caucus, seems to be a division of opinion about how to proceed going forward. What's your sense of it?
Actually, there's no division of opinion when it comes to the need to do oversight and investigation and inquiry. And we heard from the chairs of all the major committees of jurisdiction, and we are determined to follow the leads wherever they take us. And we've got very strong chairpersons of those committees who I think are going to do that in a very diligent way. I serve on Oversight and Reform, as you indicated. Congressman Cummings is the chair of that committee. We have a lot of information to pursue just based on the Cohen hearing, the Michael Cohen hearing that we had, where he put a lot more information out there that we can chase down. So we're going to do this in a deliberate way. The Mueller report obviously gives us more information that we need to follow up on.
There are people in the caucus, people running for president, Democratic nomination for president.
A lot of people running for president.
About
yes.
20, I think, large group. Yeah. No Sarbanes among them yet. But among that group, there are people who would like to see the investigation you're talking about done as an impeachment hearing before the Judiciary Committee. Too soon for that, in your view?
I think it's too soon because you want to do the investigations that then bring you to a point where you can make that kind of judgment. We don't need an impeachment proceeding to do the investigations that need to be done. So let's get started on those investigations. Let's do the inquiry. Let's see where the facts lead, and then we can make a judgment. The most important thing, as far as I'm concerned, is you get good information and facts and evidence in front of the American public so they can be the jury in 2020 and go render their judgment on what they think this administration deserves.
Sounds like you're among those many in leadership who seem to think that starting on the road of impeachment might be an unstoppable path and politically not advantageous for Democrats in 2020.
I don't even have to prejudge that, because I just know that to do these investigations in the committees of jurisdiction is the next thing that should be on our plate. So let's go do that, see where that brings us, and then handle the situation from there.
If Mr. Mueller's testimony happened to be before the Oversight Committee, and I know there's other places, what would you want to ask him?
There's so many things, but I'm very interested in just the Russian interference in the 2016 election. We just passed the first bill that Democrats introduced in this Congress, H.R. 1, the For the People Act, which I helped to assemble, contains a lot of,
your name on the bill.
Exactly, and a lot of the provisions in that bill are to protect us against those kind of attacks in the next election. So I think we need to bring a lot of attention to how do we protect our democracy against cyber attacks, how do we have a national strategic plan to combat foreign interference in our elections, how do we harden election systems across the country. Let's get ready for 2020. We put those measures into H.R. 1. H.R. 1 is now waiting on the Senate side. I think Mitch McConnell and the Republicans should take that up and show that they want to protect our democracy.
Let me remind our viewers, if you have a question for the Congressman on Russia, the Mueller report, or the Chesapeake Bay, you can give us a call. We'll have the number up on the screen. You could also email your questions. The email address, livequestions@mpt.org. So you're most interested in asking Mueller about Russian interference, which had been the focus of this. Was there collusion? He found no evidence of collusion. Well, why isn't that the end of that story?
Well, collusion, as he points out, is a layman's term. That's not a legal term, so conspiracy. And what he did was he said there's evidence that could bring you to the point of considering whether there was a conspiracy, but he couldn't prove that there was a conspiracy with that evidence. He also couldn't say in any kind of declarative way that there was not a conspiracy. So we're kind of in that gray area, which again makes the kind of inquiry and investigation that I referred to very important. Barr's going to come before the Judiciary Committee. We've asked Mueller to come testify as well. And there will be other witnesses that we can bring. So we ought to do that and see if we can get behind this. But the interference of Russia in 2016 is a signal to us. I mean, it's not like they're going to change their tactics just because Mueller published a report. If we don't harden our election systems and push back against that kind of foreign interference, we're going to wake up the day after the 2020 election, and we're going to realize that the same kind of mischief was undertaken, sowing discord in our elections and trying to interfere with our democracy. We have to combat that. That's a clear and present danger to the democracy.
So they've basically published a how-to guide now on how to do exactly that. They're not the only state actor that would have an interest in doing it.
Other state actors as well. China, we know, has engaged in this kind of interference, and others, both state actors and non-state actors. But you have to look at what Russia's done, not just in our elections. They have a pattern of behavior where they meddle in democracies all around the world. This is how they operate. And so there is kind of a playbook out there. The Mueller report has made that very clear to us. Are we going to respond? I think we should. I'd like Mitch McConnell to take up H.R. 1 and put in place those protections that are contained in that bill.
Let's get to the phones. This is Shayla in Baltimore County. Oops, hit the wrong line there. Hold on 1 second. Now, Shayla, you're on. Go ahead.
Yes, I'm concerned that if the Democratic Party proceeds on impeachment, that they will damage the party's opportunities to possibly win the election in 2020.
Thank you very much. Should you be talking about Medicare for all or health care?
I think the number one issue for Americans is always going to be the economy. You know, what's happening in your daily life? Do you have a job that pays a decent wage? Can you get access to health care? Are drug prices affordable to you? And I also think people care about corruption overall in politics, and they want to fight corruption. That was part of why we put the For the People Act on the floor of the House and voted for that in H.R. 1. But it's always going to be bread and butter issues that come out first. So I think we always lead on the economy, we lead on jobs, but we have to take account if somebody is trying to undermine our democracy, whether that threat comes from outside of our own country or whether it might be coming from inside. That's why we have a system of checks and balances. That's why Article 1 legislature of the U.S. Congress is there to put a check on this administration and any other administration. And before the Democrats got the gavel in this last election, there was no oversight happening, Jeff. It just wasn't happening. Now we are providing that check and balance.
President's lawyers in fighting back in court against a subpoena from your chairman, Congressman Cummings, say that oversight is crossed over to harassment, that it's an abuse of power to ask the president's accountants for everything they've got on them.
It's a very legitimate inquiry. Now, I wouldn't expect them to say anything less because they are the ones that have politicized this process. If anyone is going by the book, doing things in a deliberate, conscientious way, it's Chairman Elijah Cummings. And in fact, I was there when we put the rules for the committee in place at the beginning of this Congress. And he was very accommodating of opportunities for the Republicans to have their voice heard, to weigh in on decisions around subpoenas and so forth. But he invited them to do that in a responsible way. Unfortunately, we haven't seen that, so he has to proceed as he thinks is in the best interest of the country.
Let's talk to Zach in Montgomery County. Zach, thank you for calling. Go ahead.
Hey, good evening, gentlemen. I appreciate you fielding my phone call tonight. On the topics of hardening the systems, oversight and adhering to these playbooks, I'd just like to ask, how do we continue to bring both political parties together and work through these differences to ensure that we're having the same discussion and that we can move forward to resolutions that keep us all safe and keep fair and open, honest elections?
Zach, thank you very much.
Actually, this is the perfect way to bring the parties together, fighting to protect our democracy, making sure that our election systems cannot be hacked by outsiders. We can disagree as Democrats and Republicans, we can have vibrant debate, but if the basic democratic institutions are under attack, if our democracy is not resilient because we have confidence in it, then it doesn't matter where those debates end. We're going to end up in discord, which is what the Russians were able to achieve. So I think Democrats and Republicans can actually come together on this idea of protecting the democracy in a kind of foundational way.
How do you stop somebody in Russia, China, or somewhere else from setting up a Twitter account, or 1,000 Twitter accounts, or 1 million of them, and pumping out various forms of propaganda?
Well, for starters, you can ask the Twitters of the world and the Facebooks and these other online platforms to be more vigilant and put some burden on them to do that. We ask broadcasters to bring a certain amount of sort of inquiry and oversight to how they handle commercials that are placed on their platforms, or they investigate what's happening. We should hold these online platforms to a similar standard, because now they can have a huge impact on our elections and the information that is provided to people. So you can provide that kind of expectation on how those online, the Twitters of the world, Facebook, how they operate, so that they are helping to protect our elections as well. And that kind of proposal is also included in H.R. 1, the For the People Act.
Let's get one more call on this, and then we'll talk Chesapeake Bay a little bit. Franklin County, Pennsylvania, this is Maggie. Maggie, thank you for calling. Go ahead.
Hi.
Hi.
I just wanted to ask Sarbanes why they don't produce the evidence instead of hunting evidence for justice. They've got justice going backwards.
Explain that.
Well, the Mueller investigation, as soon as Russia came out of the people's mouth, they started investigating. They don't even have evidence of Russia interfering. They always do the justice while they're hunting for something. Produce the evidence,
Maggie,
and then justice will be served.
Thank you very much for the phone call.
So if there's one thing we have plenty of evidence on, it's Russia's interference. I mean, there were 13 people that were indicted. We can't get to them because they're in Russia. But we know what this Internet Research Agency was up to, so there's very clear evidence. I mean, nobody disputes it in either party that the Russians interfered in the 2016 election. So that's why I say this is where we need to move, and move quickly, because, Jeff, the election's next year. The next presidential election is next year. You can bet that Vladimir Putin and his folks are gearing up again to get in the middle of our election. And there are things that we can do. We need a national strategic plan to combat that kind of interference in our elections. Republicans, independents, Democrats all have a stake in making sure that our democracy is protected.
Let's talk about the Chesapeake Bay,
Yeah.
protecting the Bay. We're having the annual fight about funding, which was reduced, if not cut out entirely, in the Trump administration budget. That's happened before. The money winds up getting put back in. Your thoughts on that, status of the Bay, biggest threats?
Well, first of all, I'm very disappointed in this administration's approach to Chesapeake Bay. As you pointed out, in his first budget, President Trump proposed to zero out the $73 million that goes to the Chesapeake Bay program through the EPA. Now, Congress restored that. In his second budget, he reduced it by 90%. We restored it. Democrats and Republicans, by the way, working together. He's proposed again to reduce it by 90%. Now, our counter to that is we actually should be investing some more dollars in the Chesapeake Bay program, because we're coming up on the 2025 targets in terms of reducing pollution across the Bay. And now is the moment for the federal government to show that it's leaning in on this partnership to try to help us reach those goals. So we actually want to increase funding of the Bay program from $73 million to $90 million and reauthorize that for 5 years.
All right, if you had another $17 million, what would you do with it?
So these dollars go to things like, I mean, to get very sort of,
Please.
brass tacks, stream cleanups, habitat restoration, wetlands restoration, stormwater runoff projects. All of these things that you see communities stepping up in partnership around to try to improve the health of the Chesapeake Bay. The other thing is, in the scheme of things, $90 million, it's real money, but it's not a ton of money, but it can leverage other efforts across the Chesapeake Bay watershed. I co-chair now the Chesapeake Bay Watershed Caucus. So you're talking about 6 states and District of Columbia, 18 million residents in the watershed, 64,000 square miles. That's a big project, but if we work together, we can really make improvements for the Bay, and that's exactly what the Chesapeake Bay program is all about. So let's make sure we provide those dollars, and as I said, Republicans and Democrats have cooperated with each other to keep that funding strong.
Maryland Congressman John Sarbanes, thank you very much for stopping by.
Thanks, Jeff.
Appreciate it. You can learn more about MPT's Chesapeake Bay Week programming by going to mpt.org, where you will see our primetime lineup for tonight and also for the rest of the week. Coming up in our health segment, why more young people are having heart attacks. That's next as Direct Connection continues.
Got an unused vehicle going nowhere? Donate it to the one place that can take you any place. Visit mpt.org/vehicles and support the programs you love on MPT.
The MPT app puts our programs right at your fingertips, so you can choose when to watch, what to watch, wherever you want to watch it. Download it now.
Are you turning 70 and a half this year? If so, you generally have to start spending down your retirement account. Even the minimum distribution can place you in a sticky situation. Luckily, you can now use your IRA to make tax-free gifts. Gifts up to $100,000 will never count as income, but always make a difference. That's icing on the cake.
Make your gift for this year before December 31st. Visit mpt.org/support.
This is a box that showed you a world beyond your own. It was just a box, but the world has changed, and so have we. And now the box can be almost any size or shape. And you decide what you want to explore. Anytime, any place. Break out of the box with PBS.
We are the curious.
Wow!
The adventurous.
Oh!
Those venturing out for the first time.
And those who've never lost our sense of wonder.
Whoa. You seen this?
We are the hungry.
The strong.
I must be the greatest!
The joyful.
A happy little cloud.
We believe there is always more we can uncover.
More we can explore.
We believe in the capacity for goodness.
And the potential for greatness.
The torch has been passed to a new generation of Americans.
PBS.
PBS.
Segment this week, we are joined by Dr. Vasindhara Motu, cardiologist at the University of Maryland, Baltimore, Washington Medical Center. Doctor, thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
There was some incredible news recently about the fact that more people under the age of 40 are having heart attacks. You really don't think of coronary artery disease in people in their 30s. Do you see it in your practice?
Yes, unfortunately we do. You know, it's a shocking statistic, but is unfortunately true. I think there was a recent study that actually looked at people having heart attacks, and what they found was that over the last 20 years or so, almost 30% of the heart attacks are occurring in the age bracket of 35 to 54 years. So that's, much different than traditionally held norms. Previously we used to think that a man above 55 or a woman above 65 is fair game for heart disease. And these numbers, of course, suggest otherwise. I think there are 3 or 4 key factors that are responsible for this. I think the main thing is, first is the rise in the obesity epidemic. Almost 40% of Americans are unfortunately obese. And this increases the risk of diabetes and high blood pressure. And both of those are, very well established and recognized risk factors for coronary artery disease and heart attack. In addition, there are other problems such as smoking as well as drug abuse, which unfortunately remain significant public health challenges. And I think, there is a phenomenon which is considered to be new, where adolescence, seems to be growing. And that means that, people between the ages of 18 to 30, 35 years of age, they are delaying sort of the start of a family life or settling down. They are more focused on their careers. They are more stressed out. And this unfortunately increases the window for what we call as risky behavior. They are more likely to take risks. They are more independent financially, and they are less likely to listen to advice.
That's so interesting. So if they were married with kids and a mortgage, they would have less stress?
Well, they would have more stress, but I think they would be less likely to, a different kind of stress.
Less likely to engage in risky behaviors.
Yeah, like smoking and drug abuse, I think, are the 2 specific ones that, we are talking about. And so, unfortunately, in that segment, there is an increase in incidence of smoking, though overall there has been a decline in smoking pretty much, because of all the public health initiatives. And so smoking and drug abuse, are major risk factors for heart disease and heart attacks in young people.
When a 35-year-old has a heart attack, is it a different heart attack than when a 65-year-old has one?
Not
or you have your heart model with you.
Yes.
Is it the same physical thing happening?
So it can be, yes. So, heart attacks can occur in different ways. And I think the best way to understand coronary artery disease is to think of the heart as a pump. So this, is a piece of muscle, which the main job of that is to pump blood to the rest of the heart. And, it depends on nutrition through the coronary arteries. The coronary arteries supply blood to it. And if there is buildup of plaque inside it, that over time is going to deplete the heart muscle of the necessary nutrition. And if this progress is, happening over time, then people may have symptoms before they have a heart attack. But unfortunately, what can happen is that the plaque can suddenly rupture. It can go, say, from a 30% to a 40% blockage to a 100% blockage. And when that happens, the heart has no time to adapt. And that's, typically when heart muscle cells die, and that's what we call as a heart attack. And that can happen in young people, and that can happen in older people. But if it happens suddenly, then almost 50% of people will die before they ever reach a hospital because of unstable cardiac rhythms. That will be immediately fatal. So the risk of mortality, unfortunately, remains high even in young people having a heart attack.
Your best advice for young people who might be concerned about this, or maybe should be concerned about it, and older people, best ways to lower your risk?
So I think the best way is to first assess your personal risk for heart disease, and I think that's where seeing a physician might be important. So especially if you have a family history of heart disease or other personal risk factors such as high blood pressure, diabetes, and so on, or if you smoke, then you probably need to see a physician to see what exactly your personal risk of developing heart disease in the future is. And we have a lot of online tools and calculators to help assess this risk. And once you establish risk, then we can go about modifying these risk factors aggressively. So that might mean better management of the high blood pressure, better management of diabetes. I think diet and exercise would certainly be key. And, a healthy diet and regular aerobic exercise would be very important. Staying away from smoking and drugs would, of course, be very important as well.
Would your advice be different for a young woman as opposed to a young man?
So I think the only difference in advice would be that young women need to realize that they are also at a very high risk of heart disease. So, heart disease is the #1 killer among women in the United States, but this is a fact that is often underappreciated and under-recognized. So a lot of women may have atypical symptoms of heart disease, and they may attribute these to different causes because they don't even know that they're at risk for having a heart attack. And so I think the first step is, awareness of the risk of women for having heart attacks and heart disease, and then, of course, going about modifying it. So certainly women need to be aware of all of this as well.
When you say atypical symptoms, So the symptoms are pretty well known overall.
Sure.
Crushing chest pain and shooting your arm and your jaw and all that, correct?
Sure, yes.
But for women, it might be different.
Yeah, so, all patients will not follow that textbook, description of what happens in a heart attack, the elephant sitting on the chest. And a lot of women will have symptoms where they may just feel unusually tired or fatigued. They may just feel unwell or have a sense of impending doom. They may be nauseous, they may just be sweaty, they may feel short of breath. So they may not, and they may have some vague chest tightness or uneasiness, but they may not have that elephant sitting on the chest to tell them it is a heart attack. So they need to be aware that heart disease can present, in different ways in women, and so to watch out for those symptoms and to seek medical attention promptly.
And seeking medical attention promptly is good advice for anybody who has unusual symptoms.
Yes, if you have any concerning symptoms at all, I think it is always better to err on the side of seeking medical attention rather than not.
Dr. Mutu of the University of Maryland, Baltimore, Washington Medical Center. Doctor, thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate it. Thank you for joining us for Direct Connection. We're back Thursday with your money and business. For all of us at MPT, have a good night.
Your health segments are a co-production of Maryland Public Television and the University of Maryland Medical System.
This program was made by MPT to serve all of our diverse communities.